I would like to thank Cordoba Academy for giving me the opportunity to convey the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now, before I explain the ins and outs of the next 4 weeks and how this particular course is going to run, firstly, I'll take this opportunity to mention a few things with regards to ilm and with regards to knowledge. Now, it is mentioned in a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli muslimin aw muslimatin." That the seeking of knowledge is farz, is obligatory upon every single Muslim or Muslimatin in another narration, and also upon every single female Muslim. Now, this leads to a question as to what is considered to be obligatory. In other words, what types of knowledge is considered to be obligatory, and what types of knowledge is considered, say, for example, not obligatory to learn. Now, scholars have written that those types of knowledge which is connected with an individual, which is connected with a person, then to acquire ilm and knowledge regarding that particular topic is obligatory and is farz. So I'll just repeat that type of knowledge where a person is kind of connected with, or that person is kind of experiencing or is being involved in, then it becomes obligatory to learn something about it. In other words, it becomes obligatory to know the Quran and the Hadith perspective of that particular knowledge. Now, I'll give you an example for argument's sake. If somebody is in a business, he's doing tijara, he's in business, he's got a company, then it becomes obligatory for that person to learn about rules regarding buyu', regarding Islamic transactions. If a person, say for example, is praying salah 5 times a day, then it becomes obligatory and it becomes farz that a person, he learns or he acquires knowledge which is got to do regarding salah, which is got to do regarding wudu, about adhan, about iqama. It becomes obligatory for him to acquire and learn that particular knowledge. Now, similarly, many brothers and sisters who have attended today's course may be married. Some brothers and sisters who have attended today's course may not be married but are thinking of getting married. So because they are thinking of getting married, or they may be married, so it becomes obligatory and it becomes wajib, it becomes an obligation, a farz ayn, an individual obligation that a person, he learns about the rules and the regulations of marriage, and also in particular rules and regulations with regards to the intimate side of marriage, regarding intimacy, regarding relations, how to treat his wife, how to kind of be kind to his wife and so on. All these things it becomes obligatory and wajib for that person to learn. Now, what we gonna do in this particular course, I think the brothers who have attended the course, the sisters who have attended the course, you may have been given some handouts yesterday or a few days back. So inshallah, we'll be using these handouts as a particular guide to go over some rules and some rulings and some maslas and some explanations of certain practices, certain things which are allowed, which one is permissible to do, or certain things which a person is, say for example, is not allowed to do. Now, as I was explaining, that this inshallah is a particular course we're doing. So because it is a course, inshallah I will prefer if there is a bit more interaction. It's not like I'm delivering a lecture that I just speak for 1 hour or so, and then 10 people understand what's happening and the other 10 people don't understand what's happening. But inshallah, what we want to do is that we want to make it a bit more interactive. So in other words, if I'm explaining something and you're not sure, then you could send a message, and then inshallah I'll try to explain that particular point again. Now, before I go into the rules and the regulations about intimacy of marriage, there may be some of you thinking, or there may be some other brothers and sisters who may be linked with Cordoba Academy, or who may not have been linked with Cordoba Academy, who may have seen the poster and read intimacy in marriage. What kind of topic is that? What are the people in Cordoba Academy doing? What is this Mufti Saab and this teacher doing that he's teaching about intimacy of marriage? Doesn't he have any shame? Doesn't he have any kind of haya and modesty? How can he talk about these kind of things to groups of students, to people, to fellow Muslims and Muslimas? How can he talk about something like that? Now, let me explain that the beauty of our deen, or the beauty of our religion, is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there are many examples we will find where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sometimes explains certain things of an intimate nature openly to the Sahabas, openly to the female Sahabiyas. And the beauty of our deen is that our deen is not just connected to prayers and to fasting and giving zakat and going hajj once a year. But the beauty of our deen is that our deen is a comprehensive deen. It's a comprehensive religion. Our deen, from the beginning of the day all the way until the evening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us how to lead a life. So from the very beginning, when you wake up in the morning, all the way until the evening, what to do, how to pray salah, how to meet with people, how to deal with people, how to do the transactions, how to be kind to your neighbors, how to be kind to your children and wife. Everything Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taught us. Everything's been taught by the Sharia and by the Deen. So even when it comes to rules about intimate relationships, about sexual intimacy, even the Quran and even the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us ample of guidance in terms of what is permissible to do and what is impermissible to do. Now, I just want to quote a hadith because I mentioned a couple of minutes back that even Ab sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was kind of explicit sometimes, not all the times, but explicit sometimes in explaining these kind of rules. And a very good example, I'll just narrate this hadith to you, which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. The words of the hadith are that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Iza jalasa bayna shu'abiha al-arba." Iza jalasa bayna shu'abiha al-arba, which means that when a man sits amidst the four sides of his wife. So when he sits in between the four sides of his wife, then the hadith says, "Thumma jahadaha," and then he puts pressure on her. Thumma jahadaha means that he puts pressure on her. In other words, that he has relations with her. Then in that situation, the next part of the hadith, فَقَدْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْغُسْلُ, that ghusl and a bath will become obligatory and wajib upon him. So I'll just explain this hadith again. إِذَا جَلَسَ بَيْنَ الشُّعَبِهَا الْأَرْبَعِ. So when a man sits amidst the four sides of his wife, ثُمَّ جَهَدَهَا, then he puts pressure on her. In other words, he has relations with her. فَقَدْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْغُسْلُ, then ghusl will become obligatory and wajib. So look, this is the words of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and even Ab sallallahu alaihi wasallam kind of clearly explaining that if a man is having relations with his wife, if a man is on top of his wife and they have relations, then what will happen? فَقَدْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْغُسْلُ, the ghusl will become wajib and obligatory. So this is a very clear and a very explicit hadith where he explains about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explaining this kind of topic in a bit more detail and an explicit way. So what we can understand here is that what we are learning or what we are doing is not something shameful to learn about this topic. It may be a bit embarrassing for some, that's fine, but it's not considered to be shameful, because they're two different things. Sometimes people, they get embarrassed in little things. That's fine, that's how Allah has created certain individuals, that's part of fitrah. But what we are studying here, or the course which we are going to be doing, it is not considered to be shameful. You may feel a bit, awkward, I should say, about learning this topic. That's fine. You may feel a bit awkward, but if there are other people, okay, I think some people are not getting my voice clearly. Let me just... Assalamu alaikum. Can everybody hear me now properly, or? Okay. Yeah, I think for some sisters, okay, I'll just wait a couple of seconds. Just wait for everyone to just. If you could just give me an email or that you're getting the voice clearly. I think some sisters are not getting it. Okay. Yeah, I think think most of you are getting it. Yep. I think. You can click on the video to stop it. Okay. 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 I think. Yeah. Inshallah, we'll continue. I think everyone more or less is getting the voice clearly. Okay. Just. Okay. Now, as I was saying that that there may be some of you thinking that why are we doing such a course for? So I've already explained that there's two different things. One is one part is considered to be embarrassed, so that's a personal, individual thing. But what we are doing is not considered to be, say, for example, immoral or something which is against haya and something which is against modesty. Another couple of reasons which I think a course like this is something very, very important. A couple of reasons is, number one is, unfortunately, we live in a time where fuhsh and immorality is at its peak. You could just go onto the internet, type a few words, a few letters, and then that gives you access to hundreds and thousands of immoral websites. And the reality is, even though they are Muslims, even though our brothers and sisters are Muslims, but the reality is that many of our Muslim brothers and sisters are going onto these websites and they are learning about relations, they are learning about sexual relations, but they are seeing or viewing or learning about sexual relations in an unlawful and in a haram way. And there are certain things they see on these websites which they think is Islamically permissible, and then what happens is that they then start thinking, because it is permissible, that they start then performing these kind of actions and these kind of things with their wives, with their spouses. And the second reason, or the second point I'll mention here, is that I'm not sure about other parts of the world, but in particular in the UK, it's now more or less become a law that sex education that sex education is something which is like considered in the primary schools, in the secondary schools, to be in this country or in the UK to be like part of the law. Like what I mean by that is, from a very young early age, our children are getting taught sex education. Like, you do this, you do that, this is what you do, this is what you not do. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that this topic is kind of being shown, or is kind of being explained. It's being explained to our children in school. It's being explained to our youngsters in secondary school. If it's not being explained to them, then our teenagers, our brothers and sisters who are in their 20s and so on and so forth, they are then learning about this particular topic, but through haram sources, through haram internet sites. So now it becomes like necessary that where there's a kind of understanding, or people are getting wrong information from somewhere else, then it becomes an obligation for the ulamas, for the scholars, for the imams, that what they do is that they should teach this particular knowledge or this particular ilm to the people, to the masses, so that they get the Islamic perspective of this particular ilm and of this particular knowledge. So these are two reasons why you can actually give as an answer to people that why it is important to learn this. Number one is because of it's well documented outside on the internet, this particular type of deeds and these particular type of actions. And the second reason is because our youngsters nowadays, in particular through schools, through colleges, are getting too much exposure, and then they kind of get mixed up between what is Islamically lawful and what is Islamically unlawful. Now, before we look any further, does any brothers or sisters who have attended the course would like to ask any questions before we move on to the next part? Like use the email on the side or the message on the side. There's a brother or someone called Marian Ali who said that I heard from a sheikh say that talking about it is permissible if it is indirect, and that is a sunnah. Yeah, so that is true. Like as long as it's been mentioned indirectly, without using vulgar words, then you can talk about this particular topic. Yeah, so that is right here, what the sheikh mentioned. There's another sister, Usma Mushtaq, who's asking that I want to ask something. Then I think you could ask a question. I think using the chat section on the bottom of the right hand page. Sadika Suley, are we allowed to supposed to ask questions here only? I think this will be the question section. I'm actually quite new to this. It's the very first time I'm doing an online course, but as far as I know, I think this is the question section. Okay, a question being typed here. I'll just take one question at a time, and then inshallah we'll continue with you, and then the rest I'll look at it later. Okay, question by one of the sisters that that her friend told her that I should marry as soon as possible, and it is sin for me to stay unmarried, and I am only 22 years old. Now, do you know that particular question? I'm just going to give a small short answer because it's not actually connected with the topic of intimacy, because I don't want to then take other kind of questions and then it's going to take too long. But basically, it is a sunnah that you should try to get married as soon as possible. But obviously, if you can look after yourself, if you can remain your chastity and you can protect your chastity, then you can obviously wait until you find the right person and the right spouse. Obviously, you said you're 22 at the moment in time, so it's not about the age here, it's about whether you can protect your chastity. So if you can protect your chastity, then obviously you could wait until 25, 27, 29, 30. The Prophet ﷺ, he was 25 when he firstly got married. So the main issue is about the chastity. So the main thing is that it's not a sin that you're 22 and you haven't married yet. It's not a sin. The main thing is that can you protect your chastity? So that is the main thing. If you're finding it difficult, then it will become wajib and obligatory to get married as soon as possible. Okay, now we're going to now look at the handouts which was probably emailed to you by Brother Azhar and probably by Sheikh himself. The first section which we are looking at is with regards to intentions of sexual intimacy. Now this first section here is with regards to this first section here is whenever we have relations with our wives, then what kind of intention should we make? Now I'm sure everybody has heard that very famous hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, of innamal a'malu bin niyat, that actions are according to intentions. Very, very famous hadith. Now, what does that hadith, actions are according to intention, means? It means that whatever action you do, you'll be rewarded according to the intention in your heart. So in other words, if you prayed salah, but you prayed salah to show someone that you're pious or you're religious, then you're not going to get any thawab at all for that prayer or for that salah. But if you prayed salah and your intention was to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're going to get the reward, you're going to get the thawab. And I'll just narrate to you a very famous hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that on the day of judgment, 3 people will firstly enter the hellfire. The first one will be a alim, a knowledgeable person. Number 2 will be a mujahid, a warrior. And number 3 will be a mutasaddiq, i.e. a person who would give charity. And basically, in a nutshell, why would these 3 people will enter hell and Jahannam first? The reason why is because an alim or a scholar, this particular scholar or alim, he will say to Allah that, oh Allah, I acquired knowledge because of you. But Allah will turn around and say, kadhabta, that you are lying. You didn't acquire knowledge because of me. You acquired knowledge because you wanted to be called a sheikh, you wanted to be called a alim, you wanted to be called this, you wanted to be called that. It was done with the intention of fame and riyah. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will throw him into the fire of hell. The same with regards to a mujahid, a warrior, exactly the same. That he will be thrown into the fire of hell. Why? Because he fought in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for i'la'i kalimatullah, not to raise the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he fought in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the intention so that he is called a brave person, he is called courageous. That's why he fought in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same with regards to the mutasaddiq as well, that he only gave sadaqah and charity so that people call him rich and generous. So actions are according to intentions. Now if you have a look at the handouts which I gave, 2 intentions we should make when it comes to relations with our wives. Number 1 is procreation, which means that when we have relations with our wife, our intention should be of procreation, or in other words, that we are having relations so that we can have children, and by having children it will then increase the Muslim Ummah. So that should be one of our intentions. And I've also mentioned a hadith there which can be found in Sunan Ibn Majah, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last part, if we just read that last part of the hadith where it says, and marry, for indeed I will outnumber the other nations by you. So in other words, what should happen is that when we marry, it should be done with the intention of increasing the Muslim Ummah, the population of the Muslim Ummah. Sorry to interrupt. I got another message again that somebody said they can't hear me properly. So again, is that the same, or anybody else experiencing that particular problem? Or okay. That's what I think. Some of you have are emailing back and saying that that's fine. So, okay, so probably obviously that particular person who's having some difficulty. Okay, so that's the first intention, that it should be procreation. And number two, the second intention when we are having relations is that it should be done with the intention to protect ourselves against fornication. That we don't fall into zina, we don't fall into fornication. So that's like the main thing, that when it comes to relations and intimacy, number one is procreation, and number two is protection against zina and fornication. And again, if you have a look at the notes there, I didn't mention a hadith there as well of Sahih Muslim, where he explains that if, say for example, if you were to have relations in a haram place, or in other words with an unlawful woman, a person would have got one sin for it. So similarly, if you were to counteract that and turn the tables, if somebody was to have relations, then he should get thawab and he will get reward for that, because he's mentioned the hadith wa fi bud'i ahadikum sadaqah, that in one of your wives' buddha, i.e. after having relations with one of your wives, then sadaqah, you will get sadaqah and you will get reward for that. So what we can understand is that actually having relations with our wives is considered to be a good deed and is considered to be a good action. And there's actually a saying of Ibn Jawzi, Imam Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, very famous imam and scholar, who's actually written that having relations with one's wife, is considered to be better than 1,000 years of worship. So it's considered to be better than 1,000 years of worship. So fair enough, that's Imam Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah's opinion. But what I'm trying to explain is that there is reward in having relations with one's wife. Now, before we move on to the next section, any questions any brothers or sisters have, and also some questions which have been emailed before, so I'll just try to answer it. Another question from a brother here, that are sexual desires a signal that one should get married now? So the answer is that that you could say in a way that having a lot of desires and having a lot of shahwa is, in a way, yes, it is a sign that you should think about having or getting married and so on. Obviously, what we look at is this Arabic word called tawqan, halat tawqan. And tawqan basically means that if your desires are more, like it's proper overwhelming, then you should think about getting married. Naturally, we as human beings, we're gonna have desires. I'll touch on this probably later on as well, that we naturally do have desires. So that's always gonna be there. But what the Sharia says is that it should be done in the lawful and the halal way. So if it's like 50-50, then it is not necessary. But if the desires are overwhelming, then it will become necessary and obligatory. Okay, some of the questions. Okay, somebody asked a question that if somebody, say for example, whilst listening to this talk or course and some of the things which we're going to mention, if they were to have a discharge, then is it obligatory for them to take a bath? Now let me just explain the word discharge here just very quickly without going into too detail. One is called in Arabic mani, Mim Noon Ya, mani. And mani is like a thicker type of semen which comes out after actual relations with one's wife. So if, say for example, if a person had actual relation with his wife, so the thicker semen which comes out after passion, that is called mani, mim nun ya. Or like, say for example, but we'll look at that later, masturbation, which is like haram in Islam. So now if a man masturbated and then the semen came out, because it like shoots out and it's like thick, so that is called mani. Now if mani was to come out, then it is obligatory and wajib that a person has to take a ritual bath, a ghusl, before offering salah. But when it comes to like listening to these kind of talks, or even like certain passionate things, or having a passionate conversation with one's wife and certain discharge comes out of a person's private parts, then we call that in Arabic madhi, mim zal ya. And if madhi was to come out, and madhi, by the way, is like a very thin liquid, very thin liquid. So the rule about madhi is that you don't have to go for a bath, you just like wash that particular part with water, and that would be sufficient, and then you will be able to perform ghusl afterwards. Another question a brother asked here is about please explain to us protection against fornication again. So what does he mean by protection against fornication? So protection against fornication means that to kind of save yourself from zina, so adultery, or it could also mean like adultery related issues or adultery related things. So it could say, for example, when you have a wife and you have relations with her, so it saves you from adultery, like you won't think about having relations with another woman. Also, it will stop you from adultery related things such as nadhar, i.e. looking at an unlawful woman. Because looking at an unlawful woman, as Allah says in the Quran, وَكُلِّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُدُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ يَغُدُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, which means that, O believers, يَغُدُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, lower your gazes. So if somebody has a healthy, intimate relation with his wife, then he won't even think about looking at an unlawful woman. When he sees a beautiful woman walking in front of him, he won't think about looking at her. Why? Because he's got his wife, he's happy with his wife, he regularly has relations with her, so he won't think about anything else or about doing anything else. So that's another meaning of like protection against fornication. So it could be anything which is adultery or fornication related, looking at unlawful women, having desires for unlawful women, masturbation, all that comes under having relations with, protection of against fornication. Okay, and one final question before we continue with the course is, how can we tell our parents about our desires? Obviously, it may be obviously embarrassing to tell your parents directly that I have this desires, I have that desires, and so on. I think the best way to go around it is that if you have, say for example, an elder brother, then you could speak to your elder brother about it, and then your elder brother then could hint about, say for example, thinking of getting you married. He's reached that level, or you yourself in certain conversations with your parents could hint towards that. Obviously maybe a bit awkward to like explain to them clearly that, oh, this is, I got this problem, I got desire, and so on. But obviously if you were to hint towards it, then inshallah there should be no problem with regards to that. Okay, we're going to continue with the, inshallah, I'll take the next batch of questions later on, inshallah. Now the next part of the handouts which I gave, the next section is with regards to relations or intimacy is considered to be a right of both spouses. So it's considered to be the right of both spouses. In other words, intimacy or having relations with one's wife, it's a right or it's a haqq for both the husband and the wife. So basically, it's both of their rights. Now, the reason I want to actually touch on this is because many people of the assumption that relations is the right of the husband. So in other words, whenever the husband wants to have relations or intimacy with his wife, then he will demand his wife to have relations with her. But actually, I've mentioned there as well that it is also the rights of the wife to kind of request relations and intimacy from him. So in other words, if the husband is not, say for example, fulfilling his wife's needs and desires, then the husband will be considered to be sinful for his actions and for his refusal to have intimacy with his wife. So it's actually it's a two-way thing. This is actually, husband's got the rights of intimacy, also at the same time the wife has also the rights of intimacy as well. So it's like a two-way thing which couples and spouses should remember. Now, I've also mentioned there that if you look at the second paragraph of your handout, that the difference is that the husband can demand relations or intimacy with his wife through a court of law. However, in the case of a woman, she cannot demand this through a court of law after the husband had relations with her at least once since being married. Now, what I mean by that is they both have rights, but in terms of the level of their rights is slightly different. In other words, the husband, his rights of relation with his wife is higher, and then the wife's rights for relations is considered to be like lower. And in other words, what I mean by that is, if say for example the wife is not having relations with his wife, so the wife is not having relations with the husband, the husband can take this case to a qadi, to a court, to a judge, and basically explain to the judge and qazi that this is what is happening at home, and the qazi and the judge, the Islamic judge, can actually enforce the wife to have relations with the husband. Now, I'll come back to that point in a second, because I think some of you may have some questions, but I'll come back to that in a second. Whereas, the wife, she can't enforce her right on the husband. In other words, she can't say to the husband, you have to have relations, otherwise I'm going to take you to the judge. But what will happen is that if the husband refuses to have relations with the wife, then what could happen, or what would happen, is that the husband would be morally considered to be sinful. And what I mean by morally sinful, in other words, between himself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the husband would be considered gunagar and would be considered sinful for his actions, or in other words, for his refusal to have relations with his wife. Now, I'm just going to elaborate on that point, because I mentioned there that the husband has a right to go to the qadi, to the judge, and basically compel his wife to have relations with him. Now, somebody may take the wrong meaning here that, na'udhu billah, is Islam kind of allowing the husband to rape his wife or something. No, we're not saying that, so please don't get the wrong idea of what I just explained. We're not saying that. What we are saying is basically he has that right. Now, obviously, just because he's got that right, it doesn't mean that he can force himself on his wife. There's certain rights we have, but it doesn't mean that you can force it upon certain individuals. You have certain rights about your wives or your children, but as you know, certain rights which you have Islamically, you can't actually enforce it because of one reason, or because of certain things you can't enforce it. So now what I'm trying to say is that, and I'll just also explain another hadith as well at the side. I'm sure many of you have heard this hadith. It's of Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, where it's mentioned that when a man calls his wife for relations, and the wife, say for example, refuses. I'm sure everybody must have heard this hadith before. So the wife, say for example, refuses and says that I don't want to come. So the hadith goes on to explain that the angels will then curse the wife until the morning. So all the way until the morning, the angels, the malaikas, will curse the wife for her actions. Like, will curse her for what she did and for her actions. Now what happens is that this hadith which I just mentioned, many husbands unfortunately use this hadith for their benefit, and they threaten their wives. They say, oh look, if you don't have relations with me now, then that's it, you're going to get cursed and so on. You are going to be in Allah's anger and Allah's wrath the entire night. So what happens, unfortunately, the wife, she gets a bit upset, and she then is kind of in a way emotionally forced to have relations with her husband. Now let me explain to you, brothers, in particular, the Sharia has never ever allowed the misusing of hadiths, misusing of one's opinions for one's benefit. So what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, this hadith is there, but what you need to look at is that you need to look at your wife. In other words, if she's got children, or if you have children, she's like looked after the children the entire day. She must be worn out, she must be tired. So now you ask her for relations, but she's genuinely proper worn out and so on, proper tired, proper off her feet. She's about to collapse into the bed and go to sleep. So in that situation, for you to not demand her for relations and say, oh, you need to have intimacy with me now, otherwise you're going to get cursed, and give references to the hadiths of Bukhari and Muslim, then that is totally impermissible. When it comes to relations, it should be like, your wife should be ready for it. In other words, ready meaning that she's there's no problems with her. She's not tired. She's not like really ill or bimar or sick or anything like that. Then say, for example, if the wife is refusing, then fair enough, this hadith can be used against her. But when there's problems with your wife, she's very ill, and she's been very weak, say for example, she's very tired after looking after the children and doing the other household chores, then for the husband to kind of use this hadith for his advantage, and that is considered to be very incorrect. So what I'm trying to say is that the husband has the right of intimacy. He can enforce it through a qazi, through a judge, through a scholar. But the wife, she also has a right of intimacy as well, but she can't enforce it through a judge or a qazi, whatever. But obviously if the husband is refusing to have intimacy with her, then as I mentioned there, that the husband will be morally sinful for refusing to have intimacy with her. Okay, any questions from any brothers and sisters before we look at the next point? I'll just take some questions which were emailed or written before, typed before. Okay, a brother asked this question, that is he allowed to intentionally not have kids in the beginning if the spouse agrees? so we focus on Islamic studies. Some Sahaba said they did it intentionally and no ayat stopped them or something. Now I think this brother is referring to contraception, that can we use contraception at the very beginning, like can we use contraception. So the topic of contraception is coming up later on in the course, so inshallah I'll mention it there, but it's coming up later inshallah, so I don't want to something what we're going to do next week or the week after and get it mixed up with today's lesson. Another question sister asked, I think I will repeat, I think I answered this question already, but I think the sister wasn't there or she missed the answer about the madhi. So she's replying that, it's not about madhi she was asking, but she was asking about vaginal discharge. So again, it's the same rule, that you just wash that area and you just do wuzu and you pray your salah. You don't have to repeat your, you don't have to go for a ritual bath or a ritual ghusl. But I don't want to go too into detail. There could be, say for example, the vaginal discharge could be such that it's a continuous thing. Now if it's a continuous thing, then I'm sure some of you may have heard the word ma'zur. So if somebody is ma'zur, then there's like certain different rulings for that particular individual. So I'll request the sister that it'd probably be better if you could just send me a text, or not text, email or something later on, and then I'll look at it and I'll give you a bit more of a detailed answer. Some other questions. Okay, like what should the wife do if the husband refuses to have relations with her? Now, obviously in this country, because it's not, this country meaning like in the Western countries I should say, is it's difficult because you can't enforce it, and obviously it's difficult to even approach a qadi, a scholar or an imam, because the imam, when you look at it, doesn't really have any rights over the husband, because we're living in a non-Muslim country. So in that situation, I think the husband should just be, somebody should explain to the husband that, look, what you're doing is wrong. And if, say, may Allah forbid, if the wife, because of the constant refusal by the husband, if the wife, say for example, goes and fulfills her desire with somebody else, with another man, now don't get me wrong, even though the wife would be sinful for her actions, but the husband may be, say for example, slightly at fault for his part in his constant refusal to have relations with his wife. He may be slightly at fault at that, and then you should explain to the husband or such husbands that, look, do you want your wife to do something unlawful and to do something haram? So I think that should be the way it should be explained to the husband. And last question for this particular batch, are we supposed to change the clothes after madhi? So in other words, if madhi, that discharge, if it was to fall on a person's clothes, do they have to change it? So the answer is, as I mentioned, that you don't have to change it as long as you wash that area 3 times and the traces of the impurity has gone, then that will be fine, that will be permissible. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next section. Inshallah, I'll give some chances for questions later. We're going to move on to the next section. Now, the next section here is with regards to how often. In other words, how often should the husband and wife be intimate? So how often, mean like, is it once a week, once every few days? How often should a husband and wife be intimate and have relations with each other? Now, I've mentioned there in the handouts, but I'll also explain it in my own words as well, that there isn't a particular time regarding a husband being intimate with his wife. So there's no, there isn't a particular time, in other words, once a week, once every 2 weeks. There isn't a particular time. It all depends on the husband and the wife's relationship in terms of what they think is sufficient to maintain each other's chastity and to keep each other away from zina and away from fornication. Now I'll just explain in a bit more detail. What I mean by that is, just say for argument's sake, the husband and the wife, their desires, their shahwa is quite a lot. It happens, it's mentioned in the hadith of fitrah. Remember, we as human beings have been created with two things. One is ghadabiyya, which is anger. So human beings, we have anger. So there's always anger there. Somebody who says, I don't have anger, then they're actually lying. They do have anger, but people, their anger point is different. Sometimes people, they get angry at small issues, but then there are other people who get angry at very, very big issues. So people, they do have anger. And another thing which we all have in front of us, men and women, is shahwa and desires. So we have shahwa and desires. So again, some people's shahwa is very, very small and little, but then there are others whose shahwa is very, very high. So now regarding this question about how often should the husband and wife be intimate, I said it all depends on the individual. So what I mean by that is, if say for example, if the husband and wife have a lot of shahwa and have a lot of desires, then probably once every few days may be appropriate, once every 2 days may be appropriate. Something which is like, again, there's no set time, whatever they are okay with. It could be once every 4 days, 5 days. For some others who may not have that much desires, probably once a week, once every 2 weeks. What I'm trying to say is that there's no set time about it has to be done on certain days or on certain times or once a week or once every 2 weeks. It has to be done at a time when the husband and wife, they could maintain their chastity and their ihsan. But so if it's every 4 days, every week, that's entirely up to the couples to decide. So that's the first point to mention. Now also, just like elaborating from that particular topic, another thing to mention here is regarding that whenever a husband and wife have relations, their mind has to be fresh, that there can't be any tension on their minds. If say for example they are having relations, but the husband's got something in his mind, it could be some like work issues, or I don't know, the next day he's got some big job somewhere, big meeting. So if he's got tension in the mind, or the wife's got tension in the mind, or sometimes it happens that, because obviously remember dunya, this world we live in, there's always like tension and difficulties we go through. We always get tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So naturally a person will have some certain things on his head. So if he has certain things on his head, then it's probably be a good idea that he doesn't have intimacy with his wife at that particular time, because he will be having intimacy, but it's going to be more like a ritual rather than him enjoying himself and also his wife enjoying herself. So it should be a couple of things to remember, that husbands, they have to be, and wives as well, they have to have no tension. There can't be anything on their mind, no worries, these kind of things. That should be totally alleviated when they are having intimacy. Looking at it from a hadith point of view, it's mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would have relations with his wife like most of the time later on in the evening or later on at night. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go to sleep, he would then wake up, and thereafterwards he would have relations with his azwaj, with the pious wives, the azwaj mutahhara. It would be done more later on in the night. And again, the wisdom behind that is because if you were to, like, say, have a dinner at 8-9 o'clock in the evening, and then say at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock you have relations straight away with your wife, then to have relations with your wife on a full stomach, or with a full stomach, with a heavy stomach, is actually considered to be bad, health-wise as well. So therefore, one should abstain from kind of having relations very, very early at night. One should kind of wait for the food to digest and then have relations. But again, if somebody was to have it, say 10, 11 o'clock at night time, or more or less straight away after having his evening meal, then there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing haram, or there's nothing impermissible with regards to it. But look at it from a more medical point of view, it is far more better that a person, he waits for the food to digest and then have the relations later on in the night or later on in the evening. And this then takes me on to another point. I think I may not have mentioned this, but I would prefer, inshallah, because obviously the notes, the extra rules which I'm giving, it's not actually in the handout. So if you could just write it on the side, so you kind of remember it as well. And it's also very important that we kind of make notes, because when we make notes, then you'll see that you will tend to remember that information more than the information which is given, say, verbally. Because sometimes what happens when it's given verbally, we hear it and we don't observe 100% everything. But when we write things down, then we kind of observe things as well. We kind of learn it, we kind of understand it more as well. So that's why it's always very important that any kind of extra information which I'm giving in the course, that we kind of learn it, we write it down so that it stays in our mind, it stays within us. Now, another extra rule which I'll request the brothers and sisters to jot down here is with regards to, again, a common question, that is it permissible to have relations with one's wife during the day? So during the day, is it permissible to have relations with one's wife? So the answer in a nutshell is that it is permissible to have relations with one's wife during the day. You can have it during the day. Obviously, you have to make sure that the windows, everything are closed, the curtains, everything closed, the doors are locked. So as long as that privacy is maintained, then you can have relations during the day. So there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously at night time, especially if you have kids, then that's when they are asleep, and that is the time to have it when everyone's asleep, it's dark, curtains are closed. You could maintain that privacy. But if, say, for example, if one was to have relation during the day, then that is also permissible and allowed as well. Any questions before we move on to the next topic? Okay, some questions. Okay, from a brother, that I live abroad and I video call my wife. Is it allowed for us to see each other without clothes? And can we... Just wait a second. And can we... can we engage in masturbation to avoid fornication? What other alternatives do we have for our sexual satisfaction? Okay. Now, basically, I think what the brother was asking is that because he's living abroad with his wife, what can he do to have to fulfill his desires with his wife through video calls and through, Skype and these kind of things. Like, I think, how can he fulfill his desires and also the desires of his wife? Now, it's coming up later in the handouts. There's a section I mentioned about phone sex, and I'll mention it there. But in other words, in a nutshell, the answer will be that you can obviously speak to your wife in an intimate way over the phone, over Skype, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you have to make sure is that that intimate conversation does not lead towards masturbation. So in other words, you can't masturbate yourself, because we look at it that you can't masturbate yourself. So even though you're speaking to your wife in an intimate way, but at the same time you can't be masturbating and getting desires through that. That's not going to be allowed. With regards to, can you see your wife over the video call or over Skype in a naked way, in a nude way, without any clothes on? My personal advice will be that no. The reason why is that, as you know, with these kind of softwares, the one which we are using, you don't know who's hacked into your computer. You don't know who's like watching you and so on. So there's also that issue as well, that you should obviously keep your aura covered, but also there's that dangerous part that you don't know who's watching you, if that makes sense. So you could be like watching your wife nude, but there may be somebody else also watching your wife nude. So that's why I won't advise that particular course of action. I think just speak to her. Obviously you could speak to her in an intimate way. There's nothing wrong with that. But in general, it's best that you don't obviously take that particular route, if that makes sense. Another question here is, okay, there's another question sent by Sister Sadika, but I haven't actually understood your question properly. So if you could just re-type that again, please. Are there certain times when chances of conception? I haven't really understood that. Okay, another sister has emailed here that you just replied to a brother that he cannot masturbate, but if someone is away from their spouses, is masturbation still haram? But how? They are married, why cannot they masturbate? So the reason why is that when the spouses are not there, when you're masturbating with your own hands. Yeah, that's why it's not allowed. Inshallah, we'll look at it later in the course that if the wife is masturbating the husband, then that's fine. Or if it's the other way around, the husband kind of masturbating the wife, that's allowed. But when they are not together and they're in like two different countries or two different places, and the husband is kind of like masturbating himself, because the main reason why masturbation is haram is because you're deriving benefit to yourself. So because you're deriving benefit to yourself, so that's not going to be allowed. Okay. Any other questions someone wants to ask, or because I just realized that the time is about to finish for this week's lesson, so I don't want to really make a start on the next section and just leave it in the middle. But if anybody has any questions they would like to ask, or okay, going back to the question sent by the sister, that are there any like periods of the month where it's possible for a wife to fall pregnant? I think that was the question. So again, there are certain kind of opinions and so on that but